Incoming transmission.
The Klingonese word of the day is battle.
These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise.
So, this is a huge victory for the good guys.
Scotty, beam me up.
Resistance is futile. Live long and prosper.
Boldly go where no man has gone before.
Greetings and welcome to the Computer Resume podcast, the show covering the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order for fans new and old. I'm your host, writer-comedian Mr. Todd A. Davis. Podcaster, game master, husband, and father of would-be Gorn children. It's Drew Burris. Yeah!
Hey,
Drew Burris.
Hey, everybody! I'm back to talk
In
about the
uniform
Gorn.
and with a plushy Gorn. Like, expect nothing less from Drew Burris.
No, my daughter insisted that I borrow Gorn to be on the show tonight, so that he could make sure that his people were well represented in this episode.
Yes, how appropriate.
This episode that she's not allowed to see because it's too scary.
You know what? That's fair and that's good parenting. Good for you. So speaking of the family, it's been a long time since we've spoken. How are you? How was your holidays? How was your new year? How's 2024 treating you so far?
It's 2024.
I know.
Yeah, it's life comes at you pretty fast. I'm just full of millennial references. No, it's been busy. It's been good. Kind of clinging on to the back of a nacelle, hoping that I don't get thrown out of the warp bubble right now. And just kind of being in there, wanting to talk about Star Trek. I think about Star Trek every day, and
You're in good company, sir.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's good to see you. And I wanted to ask you here right off the bat. So, how many times prior to watching it for this recording, how many times have you been through Strange New Worlds? Because I know you're a big fan.
I am a big fan. Now, I will say I have not watched the entire series multiple times. I have gone back to specific episodes multiple times.
Mm-hmm. Same here.
The first episode of the series I have watched 3 or 4 times, which doesn't sound like that much. I guess it's not really that much versus all the times I've gone through TNG and DS9 and all of that. But just because I've tried to get, like my wife has never been interested in Star Trek, and we went to see, this has been 2 years ago now. We got to see at Dragon Con Anson Mount and Ethan Peck and gosh, I can't remember her name, and it's gonna drive me crazy. Nurse
Bush.
Chapel, Jess Bush. Thank you. I feel really bad because she's my favorite character in Strange New Worlds because she's got weird energy that I think brings a lot of cool stuff out in the show. We got to see them speak at Dragon Con, and as we were doing that, she fell in love with the 3 of them on stage, and their rapport on stage, and she's like, maybe I'll watch this show. And we got 2 episodes in before she lost interest again. So I've watched, but of the other episodes, obviously there's one episode in season 2 that I have watched more than many Star Trek episodes.
Watched, sang along, perhaps?
Not sang along. I have watched that one a few times as well. But no, this one might involve some different mediums of presentation.
Of the ink and paint variety?
Yeah, as we talk about those old scientists.
Yes. I can't lie. I will, if I'm working on something around the house, there have been numerous plays on Subspace Rhapsody. It's just really, really good. And
their intelligence is that they put the soundtrack out the next day on all the streaming services.
Yeah.
So you can just listen to it whenever you want.
Kind of surprised it's not on vinyl somewhere.
I
looked
am
for
too,
it the other day.
Now that you've said it out loud.
I mean, speaking of vinyl, like we have a deal right now going on. I don't know if you know this, Drew, but we actually do have a deal with Enjoy the Ride Records, where if you enter the code Computer Resume Pod, you actually get 10% off of Jerry Goldsmith's Star Trek: The Motion Picture exclusive pressing.
Yeah, I saw your TikTok when you put this out.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. I'm not a vinyl guy,
No.
but if I had a reason to be a vinyl guy, it'd be the reason. I mean, our mutual friend Miles has gifted me a number of vinyl records over the years. And I've had no way to play them.
I think there's a couple of choice albums out there for folks to have, and I don't think anybody would fault if you had them in multiple media. So vinyl, cassette, CD, digital, the whole thing. I'm a big Pink Floyd guy, Bob Marley, legend. It's a classic, Beatles, Stones. There's some great comedy albums that are kind of like really choice, Steve Martin, Wild and Crazy Guys. There's a few others out there, Carlin, and the list goes on and on there. But
the Eddie Murphy albums were huge.
Eddie Murphy, of course, yeah. But yeah. So, anyways, if you're listening, Computer Resume Pod, use that code at enjoytheriderecords.com.
And for the record, Star Trek: The Motion Picture, not a perfect film. I watched it really for the first time since my youth, a couple years back, and I liked it a lot more than I did when I was watching it as a teen. And the one thing you can never fault about that movie is the music. The music in that movie is great.
Yep. R.I.P. Jerry Goldsmith, man, he knocked it out of the park. It's so great. So great that they continued to use it in other series. Like it's really good music, man.
Oh, what's the Next Generation theme doing in this movie? That's weird.
What? So let's we've showered Strange New Worlds with a lot of love already, but let's staying spoiler free, let's get into this episode a little bit. We got a couple things going on here. We've got first appearance of the Gorn. We've got stuff going on with Lon, stuff going on in medical, and Pike and the gang trying to figure out how to keep the ship in one piece. We've got Uhura and Hemmer doing stuff down in the cargo bay. There's a lot to unpack here. What jumps out at you? What were your favorite moments? Again, trying to stay spoiler free, but what did you think of this episode, Memento Mori?
So I, for the record, this is a hot take. Are you ready?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Love
brace
hot
for
takes.
Brace for impact. I think Memento Mori is one of the best episodes of Star Trek.
Of Star Trek, period?
I do.
Oh, that is really high praise.
I love this episode for multiple reasons, and I'm going to try to stay spoiler free. So call me on it if I'm drifting into different things. So you have this as a character focused episode for Laan Noonien Singh, who at the start of this show, this is only episode 4 of Strange New Worlds. We are barely getting to know most of these people. And so far in this series, Laan has been like, oh, she's a Khan descendant. We're going that, like, blah, blah. What are we going to do? Yeah, this episode completely turned me around on this character.
Really? Okay.
This is where Laan becomes a character that I watch on screen and enjoy and look forward to their presence and their performance.
All right.
Meanwhile, Uhura and Hemmer are some of the best character development for an existing character in Star Trek. Hands down. Fantastic. Yeah. Love it. Pike, they give Pike so many good, just meaty pieces of dialogue that I have some written down. We'll get to that later. But if there is a reason that people love Pike, it's because of lines that he has in scenes, inspirational quotes and things like that.
Our good friend, comedian Patrick Cunningham says he gets all the Captain America speeches.
Hi, I'm Captain America, here to talk to you about one of the most valuable traits a soldier or student can have. Patience.
And you know what? Anson Mount does a tremendous job with them. Anson Mount has had fewer hours on screen of any other captain in Star Trek, with the exception of Sulu. and
Yeah.
but he makes it count. He's really, really great in the role. And beyond that, you have moments in this. This is an episode that is all about trusting your crew, trusting yourself, using science to solve problems. It's got everything. It's got everything that reads Star Trek to me, and it's exciting, and it's interesting, and there are great character moments, and there are surprising moments that, like this I will say this episode is maybe not the most shocking episode when it comes to what it's about, but the way they tell the story and the way they solve the problems and the way that everything kind of builds on each other and raises the stakes. Mwah, chef's kiss. I love it.
Yeah. I really don't even have much to add to that. It's you've hit all the nails on all of the heads. Like it's you get some really wonderful character moments, fantastic dialogue delivered through wonderful performances. We see these characters and some of the relationships. That's actually one thing I've looking at Star Trek as a whole. For me, when I'm asked about favorite characters, it's really hard for me to say. I can point out favorite character relationships that I really enjoy. I love the interaction of, Data and Geordi. I really love the interaction between Riker and Wesley. I really love the interactions between Cisco and Kira. I love
it's very interesting that you said Riker and Wesley, because oftentimes it's the Picard-Wesley relationship that gets compared.
Well,
but
to be completely honest, I always really enjoyed sort of the father-son, mentor-mentee relationship triangle that is Picard, Riker, and Wesley.
Well, and if you've heard Will Wheaton speak on this, which I'm sure you have, so I'm going to say something you've already heard, but he sort of looked at Frakes and Riker as his space dad, as his ideological father, because Will Wheaton's personal life and home life was not particularly good, to say that with any kind of grace. And so to see the relationship between the two of them, and knowing how much Frakes personally looked out for Will Wheaton behind the scenes on set.
Oh yeah, I could go on and on with all the different relationships, and I'm sure anybody listening is probably continuing to rattle them off as we continue talking.
O'Brien and Bashir, Cisco and Nog,
there's tons. Spock and Bones.
Wonderful. Michael Burnham and Saru.
Yeah. Anyways, looking at all of those things, we do get some really interesting character moments, and there is one that I do want to focus on, but I feel like that might be getting into spoiler territory. So let's just not wait any longer. Let's get to this week's recap. Brought to you in part by our Patreon supporters: Rev J, Jerry Antimano, Cosmic Crit, Kitty B, David Willett, Ed Milner, Fleet Admiral First Class Fred Sims, and Ren, and Space Monkey 73.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert.
Enterprise attempts to deliver a nuclear-powered air filter to a Federation colony, but finds many of the colonists dead.
Sucks.
Lon helps evacuate the survivors and recognizes the situation from her childhood as a trap set by the Gorn.
And on that note, we cue the music.
A Gorn ship attacks and does significant damage to the Enterprise. Mbenga and Nurse Christine Chapel resort to 21st century medicine to treat the wounded when their equipment goes offline.
My God, what is this, the Dark Ages?
The crew lure the Gorn ship into the atmosphere of a brown dwarf near a black hole.
And so on.
where both ships' sensors and shields are useless. Spock figures out a way to track the Gorn ship, and they destroy it. But 3 more Gorn ships arrive. One is crushed by the pressure of the brown dwarf's atmosphere. Spock mind melds with Lon to learn about the Gorn's comm system, and they use this to trick one ship into firing on the other.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Enterprise then warps around the black hole,
And so on.
temporarily disappearing, and ejects the destabilizing air filter, which explodes, convincing the remaining Gorn ship that Enterprise is destroyed.
And there was much rejoicing.
What pop culture melodies make your Mondays magical? Is it the soundtrack or score to a mainstream movie? How about shows like Goosebumps or The X-Files? Maybe it's this little ditty. You can get all these and more from Enjoy the Ride Records. Enjoy the Ride Records is a Long Island, New York-based record label, specializing in cult-following reissues throughout a variety of genres, working with a group of diverse licensing partners throughout the entertainment industry to help create albums in a unique, limited release format since 2008. Enjoy the Ride Records collaborates with companies and artists alike to ensure a quality product is created using the highest quality audio and artwork sources available. Right now, Computer Resume podcast listeners save 10% on Star Trek The Motion Picture, the Director's Edition, music composed and conducted by Jerry Goldsmith, by using the coupon code ComputerResumePod exclusively at EnjoyTheRideRecords.com. And Computer Resume Podcast Patreon supporters at the $10 level or higher will get a special code for an additional 15% off. That's right, a total of 25% off the motion picture score just for being a Patreon supporter. So what are you waiting for? Go to patreon.com and sign up before the end of April 15th, 2024 to get your code while supplies last. And remember, no matter what you're listening to or where you're going, enjoy the ride.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Gordon, the voice of the USS Protostar on Star Trek Prodigy. You're listening to the Computer Resume podcast.
Sometimes patience is the key to victory. Sometimes it leads to very little, and it seems like it's not worth it. And you wonder why you waited so long for something so disappointing.
Okay, so now that we're through all that, let's get super spoilery here. I want to give you as much time as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and say my one thing here right off the top. I really enjoyed, and this is sort of a precursor to my main point, but the interaction with Pike and Lon in Pike's ready room, where he said, he's giving her the speech about asking for miracles and putting on a brave face and trying to give hope in this desperate situation. And
belief can be the difference between victory and defeat.
Yes, exactly.
Love it.
So, and she kind of sees his point, acknowledges it, and she even says, okay, I'll make that adjustment. But you can see she's still approaching this very coldly. And, back out on the bridge sometime later, Pike is giving Ortegas some directives, which Ortegas obeys, but in a way that you see his head lean, and he's not happy that she said some things out loud. Yeah. Because again, we're trying to maintain this level of professionalism and, a brave face in this crisis. And that kind of energy takes it in a direction you probably don't want to start down that path. You know what I mean? And then later, when they're tracking that ship, it's a very, Hunt for Red October situation. And Ortegas is itching. That trigger finger is itching. And she's like preparing to engage the enemy. And Pike doesn't engage with Ortegas. he looks at Lon. It's like, hey, this is your opportunity. Coming up in the martial arts school, as a young man, I did my fair share of screwing around and goofing off when I probably shouldn't have. I got called for it. I got got punished for it through push-ups or other disciplinary measures. That happens. But actually earlier tonight, I had an opportunity to do the same thing. I saw some of the black belts who were not behaving as black belts should. And rather than say anything in front of the group, I waited because one of them was an instructor and pulled them aside later and said, hey, look, can't goof around. You shouldn't goof around, during class because people are watching you. It wasn't, hey, I'm not worried about their techniques. Their techniques are fine.
Yeah.
What I'm worried about is they're setting an example for someone else. Because when I was in their position, people were watching me. Now I'm the old man. Nobody's watching me. Nobody's watching my fat try to muscle my way around the floor.
It raises something interesting that I don't think I'd really thought about when it comes to this. So oftentimes you're talking about captains, you're talking about like Picard, or Kirk is the explorer, and Picard is the diplomat, and Sisko is the builder, and Janeway is the protector who is trying to get her people home.
Yeah.
But Pike, and so often, and you raise this point, Pike is the one that is the developer. He is developing people. He is building, he's helping to develop people's careers, whether that be Uhura, talking to her about why she's even on the Enterprise when she's not, basically kind of being blunt but not really blunt about things with that, and this was previous episodes, that she is, thousands of people applied to be on the Enterprise and you got it and you're not even sure you want to be here, and like and seeing that care that he takes with empowering La'an in these situations, and that he has done that with other characters throughout the show. And I'm just now clicking with that's who he is. He is the one that builds up other people, and I love that.
Yeah. In fact, now that you've said that, it makes me think of the Short Trek with him as a prisoner and the ensign, and they're in that singular room, and he's finding creative ways to develop all of these people, and a way that he'll deal with Lon is not the same way that he'll deal with a young engineering ensign. And it's interesting to see that he's so well versed in people observation, people composition, and like you said, building them up, into the best of Starfleet.
I have seen criticism of Erica Ortegas's character that she's a little too flippant on the bridge. She's a little too jokey and says things, but there's a reason that Pike allows that. There's a reason that he allows that to happen, because she does those things when she is nervous. When she is it's not all, she gets away with it when things are not super tense, but I think he understands that is an outlet for her. And when it matters, he knows how to get her to get involved and do her best work. And like, oh, you're wanted to surf an accretion disk of a black hole. It's like, well, when you put it that way, Captain.
I mean, yeah, because we even mentioned earlier the episode that is coming down that we will be covering later this year, those old scientists, where Boimler and Mariner, through timey-wimey things, wind up on the 1701. And when Boimler sees Ortegas, he's like, oh, Ortegas, you're a war hero. And you see her kind of raise the eyebrows of like, hey, kid. But and that's another reason. It's like, look, we're going to have this war ravaged pilot. I mean, we really haven't gotten into the nitty gritty in Ortegas, and I'm really hoping that we do with season 3. He wants her skills on the bridge, but he knows that war has done certain things to Erica. And yes, he allows some of the flippant remarks because he knows, I agree with you. She does it when she's nervous. And if you look at the situations thus far, and even, having seen the episodes looking ahead, it is usually in times of crisis, and that kind of how she recenters herself, which, okay, fine. But yeah, I think we can also see that in the meantime, he knows what to say to her in the right way to get her to kind of buckle down and put her best foot forward. And yeah, so that's a really interesting relationship.
I love Pike even more now. Golly.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about some of the other relationships, and we'll save all the Gorn stuff for last. So we see Lon and Spock share a mind meld.
Yeah. Maybe a little bit of a retcon because Spock hasn't given a mind meld to a human before this, but
as noted in TOS season 1, episode 10, Dagger of the Mind.
We're blaming the temporal Cold War for this.
Okay.
But I love that they introduced that as a thing so that excuses so many of the retcons to stuff. It's like, oh, well, temporal Cold War changed stuff. So I love it. I think it's a very clever device to get away with that stuff. But to me, it's not just La'an, because we know La'an and number one have had a relationship in the past. She's the reason that she went to the academy, and they are also the two characters, and we see this in other episodes where they're a little more buttoned up, they're a little more serious, they have a harder time relaxing. Especially in this episode when we get just a dump of her backstory and what happened to her, because we've known a little bit about what happened to her, but we see some of it in these. And when we go through the flashback with Spock, it's weirdly, I will say, the actual end result of that flashback is maybe the weakest part of the episode for me, that I don't love. Her brother figured out the Gorn language, which is a weird alphabet that also matches up as if the Gorn are speaking English, but with a different click system.
Yeah. It's a really wild Morse code type language. Okay.
But
all right.
but I like how they get there. And I like that one, they're on the Galileo, which choice.
Oh,
Mwah.
yes.
Love it.
I had the Christmas ornament.
So did I. I had so many of those Christmas ornaments. My mom kept buying them after I moved out of the house. And I had to eventually tell her to stop. And now there's a part of me that wishes I hadn't, but it's okay. It's fine. It's fine.
I think it's a really interesting, besides the dump of Lon's backstory through that mind meld, we also see that you and I both know, and hardcore fans know, mind melds work both ways.
Yeah.
And now the security officer of the flagship knows that Spock's records are false or not complete.
to be fair, that information is classified. So he's hiding it for a Starfleet reason. But that there is more to be seen and more to know than just the surface level on all of these people. And it especially comes back with the do you ever speak plain English? Like that line from earlier that I think is funny, just because Spock has a habit of not explaining things,
Well, I know Trek fans do like to get into the nitty-gritty, into the details. And, I was going to save this for later, but I'll actually, since you brought it up, Lon says, do you ever speak in plain English? What she should have said was in plain Federation standard.
But what if Federation standard is English?
Could be.
It's already the standard language for space travel right now. It's standard language for all plane flights, FAA, not just American plane flights, but international plane flights. The standard language, the lingua franca, if you will, is English.
Really? I mean, I guess that makes sense.
It's one of those things where, with the amount of people that we have seen on crews that speak English with an accent, universal translators don't give you accents.
Yeah. Yeah, that was another thing I was wondering, is like, if by some reason Spock wasn't if he was speaking Vulcan. Has he been wearing a universal translator this whole time?
I mean, well, we've seen in that one episode of Discovery where the power goes out and the universal translators stop working, that people in the ship can't communicate with each other, which, by the way, is why you have a Federation standard language, so that when stuff like that happens, you can have people communicate with each other. And that's a big hole in my head for that particular episode that I don't remember which episode it is, but it's bothered me since that episode came out. Star Trek fans get really into the details on things.
Yes, we do. Yes, we absolutely do.
But having a standard language should emergencies happen, and that being English is not really that wild of a thing, especially if you consider that World War III decimated the planet. If you're going to have languages survive, it's likely that English is going to be one of them. You know, I'm granted, it would be easier for me if I get transported to the Star Trek universe, because I'd have a much easier time communicating with people. But
are you multilingual?
I'm not. No, I took 8 years of Spanish and I speak almost none of it. That's you have to use it, gang. If you are someone that is taking a foreign language right now, keep using it, because if you don't, you will lose it completely. I know high level Spanish grammar, syntax, and all of that, but I don't have the vocabulary. And without the vocabulary, all the stuff I actually remember about Spanish means nothing. So
I slept through Spanish 1 twice. So
well, my problem
I'm
was
probably worse off than you.
My problem was when I was in high school, we had IB. We didn't have AP foreign language. We had IB foreign language, which that's a whole other thing. But the top 2 levels, 4 and 5, had to be taken in the same year. And because I was already ahead, I took 4 and 5 my junior year of high school, meaning I didn't have any Spanish instruction my entire senior year of high school.
Oh, wow.
And I then placed out of the base levels of Spanish in college, so that I'm in like Spanish 301 in college. And turns out when you don't use Spanish for an entire year and a half before you take another class, you're not as good at it as you were, because you don't remember the stuff. So if I had been actively using it to that point, I would have had a much easier time. But yeah, I didn't. And
anyway. You know, knowing, gosh, of course, hindsight being 2020. But man, if I'd have known that I would go into law enforcement, you know, and then work as a paralegal, regardless of the language, I would have paid more attention, because we had, I took Spanish, but we had, you know, I encountered so many more people that spoke other languages as well. And it was just like, man, this would have really served me well if I had paid a little bit closer attention.
Well, you know, would have really helped you and really helps the ship is a communications officer that speaks multiple languges. Let's talk about Uhura.
Yes. Nice transition. And that's why we bring you on the show, Drew, to keep us in line. So let's talk about the mentor-mentee, the growing friendship of Hemmer and Uhura. What do you think?
I love this. This is the Uhura Hemmer relationship, with them meeting and him being this gruff Anar Andorian, this blind engineer that has a really gruff exterior, who is also kind of tacitly helping play a trick on her with certain things. And then knowing that she's a cadet, and the cadets usually, unless they're engineering cadets, they don't really care about their engineering rotation. And his constant tests of her, and her sort of being, you know, going the extra mile beforehand, and sort of him seeing that. And then when it hits the fan and she has to save the day, she has to do this stuff with his instruction because his hands are broken as part of this. Like just the not just the friendship that they develop, but just the respect that they have for each other. And and unlike so many times in media, and I'm talking outside of Star Trek here, so many times in media we are shown, you know, these people that, oh, we respect this person, and you can tell we respect this person because we say that we respect them all the time. But the performance between these two characters is just so good, and you can see the earned respect of not just Uhura for Hemmer, like, because he has softened to her and he's not this gruff, chief engineer, but that him showing the respect to her, and the two of them bonding. It's such an earned moment, and I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Them, in the midst of the depressurization of the cargo hold, and the straps are, taut to the max, and they reach out for each other and grab each other's hand. It's a nice kind of it's a nice little button of just kind of like these two folks are connected. And yes, it is a mentor mentee, but it is much deeper than that. There is that earned shared respect between those characters, and it's such a wonderful, wholesome, hopeful thing to see. I love it.
Yeah, and I guess the last sort of character development group we have is when the stuff happens and everything going on in sickbay with Dr. Mbenga and Nurse Chapel and number one, who is critically injured, and all the stuff that's going on. Yeah. I love Mbenga and Chapel. Their working relationship is great. They speaking of characters that trust each other, they don't have to earn the trust. Their trust in each other is demonstrated from moment one in episode one that they're on screen together, and they work so well together, and we learn why in later episodes why they work so well together, and that's a whole other thing that I love. But
yes, we will get there. I'm really looking forward to it.
But with that said, just the two of them working and working without supplies, and what was it? Archaeological medicine. Aren't you studying archaeological medicine? And just thinking about the way that we solve medical problems today in 2024 is archaeological medicine in their time.
To pull the curtain back, I mentioned before we started to roll, I'm actually doing physical therapy right now. And I had my first few experiences with dry needling, not acupuncture, but dry needling into my knee. I had 2 sessions with it into my knee. And earlier today, I had a session with needles going into my back, kind of at the base of my back. And the knee, folks can't see, but if you've met me, you've probably seen I have extensive tattoos. So needles aren't as big of an issue for me. However, I will say tattoos and dry needling are 2 different things.
Yeah. Tattoos don't go that deep.
No, they don't. They really don't. But yeah, the first, I could handle it going into my knee. Basically the muscle surrounding it wasn't like they were poking bone or anything. I was okay with that. But what was supposed to be my first time with the needles in my back, I was not prepared for, because that was supposed to be yesterday. And when he goes, okay, so let's go ahead with the dry needling, and I actually kind of lifted the leg of my shorts up a little bit so he could get to my knee. He goes, no, roll over. We're going to put these in your back. I was like, no, you're not. Because I am not mentally prepared for that.
Not a thing that I thought I'd hear you say.
Yeah. I was like, I'm gonna need 24 hours just to kind of get my head in the right space to be able to do that. And all that to say, coming back to Mbenga and Chapel, how's your sewing? And it's not like, oh, give me a second to get ready. Like, no, this person's bleeding. Grab a needle. Like, let's get to work.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that Jess Bush's Nurse Chapel is my favorite character in Strange New Worlds, and it's moments.
She's awesome.
It's moments like this when number one is going over the different treatments, and she talks about, oh, we could do this. It's kind of like giving birth through your nose. to which number one says, who says something like that? And Chapel just looks like, me.
Yeah.
I love it. But I also, and again, this is great character development for number one as well, because she is there hiding her injury, not talking about how bad it is.
Mhm.
And the ship's medical stores are destroyed in the initial Gorn attack.
Yep.
And they're almost out. They're going to give the last blood plasma to number one as in a transfusion, and all of a sudden another person needs it, and number one's like, give it to them, just give it to them. And it's just that self-sacrifice, that first officer taking care of her crew. Yes. And when we flash forward to the end of the episode and she wakes up after having passed out and she sees the IV drip coming from her to Mabenga and Chapel's own arms, it's just like,
Yep.
yes, this is it's about working together. It's about your crew. I love this episode. I love it. I know I'm not alone. I know this is a highly rated episode of this show. I just it hits so many things for me, and we haven't even talked about the Gorn yet.
I was just about to say, we're not done yet. Let's talk about the Gorn. First of all, ship design. Wow. Like, it's sort of this kind of asymmetrical spinning kind of I gotta imagine that it's mostly built around a Gorn to be its pilot. So thoughts about the Gorn ships for starters.
I think they're very interesting. I think they are. I think they're really, really interesting, especially because they take on a motif of the compound eye structure of the Gorn, which, spoiler warning for later episodes of Strange New Worlds, when they don't use the compound eyes on the Gorn, it's kind of my only criticism of how they've been doing the Gorn in the show so far, because they're you know, other than the fact that Kirk fought the Gorn for the first time and they'd never seen a Gorn before, and you know, that's all temporal Cold War, gang. Temporal Cold War. I don't know what to tell you. but no, just they're it is the most asymmetrical ship design since the Breen ships in DS9.
Wow. Yeah.
And they're really weird, and I'm not exactly sure how they work, and I couldn't even begin to describe the structure of the big Gorn ship, because the fighters are cool and they kind of make sense, but that huge ship just kind of meanders around. It looks really cool. I'm not sure how much logical sense it makes, but I'm not a Gorn, so I don't know.
It's so wild to look at the end of the TNG era, or you know, Enterprise and the movies, the late TNG movies, and then to jump to New Trek and see all the interesting ship designs, and you know, along with that, costume designs and set designs, and people really, you know, really pushing the bounds of what we know, not only in this franchise, Star Trek, you know, but also in just television production. It's, hey, let's swing for the fences here. And I think, you know, could they have given them some sort of bland looking rocket? Yeah, probably. But to give them a ship that raises as many questions as the Gorn themselves, I think just adds such a fun layer to the mystique. And along with that, let's talk about Lon's description of the Gorn there in the ready room, which sends a shiver down everyone's spine. Any thoughts to Lon's very sobering words about the Gorn?
Oh, I remember she calls them literal monsters. Yeah. And so this is where I look at the way that they've set up the Gorn as honestly the big bad of Strange New Worlds, which I'm for personally.
That's your plushie.
Sorry, I forget this is an audio podcast. But I look at every move they make in this, and I just think it's very clever what they've done. So you start off the episode and they are, you know, they're going to the planet, and they find, honestly, a scene that may be the bloodiest scene in Star Trek until later episodes of Strange New Worlds.
Yeah. Yeah.
With the literal like pile where they've clearly dragged bodies. Like it's extremely dark and extremely troubling. And then to learn that, oh, a ship survived, but that ship, you can't beam anybody off of it. So we've got to extend this little cargo arm in order to get people off of it. Oh, but guess what? When you have the cargo arm, you can't raise your shields. So now the ship gets hammered. And so it's extremely damaged. And then to go into the nebula of the brown, or the area around the brown dwarf where they can't use it. This episode is a combination to me of Balance of Terror, as well as sort of a combination of like the Matara Nebula in Star Trek II and the escaping the Borg cube in Best of Both
very
Worlds.
much.
This sort of combination of those things, like to the point where the Enterprise can't even use their main screen to look outside and see where the Gorn ships are coming, and just to see everything that they do. And you think, oh, they're finally figured out. Oh, we know how to track the Gorn ship now, and we're going to just drop a torpedo on this ship and destroy it and be done. And they do that, and they feel that sense of victory for about 15 seconds before 3 more ships appear, because that was a test and they failed. And it's just they are being set up as just not just ruthless hunters and killers, but effective hunters and killers.
Yeah, in going back to some of the things that I was saying about Lon's interaction with Pike, and Pike trying to get her to see that in this situation, her as a bridge officer, part of her duty is to inspire hope. And if you ask for a miracle, you might get one. And that whole speech. But the idea of hope. And then one of the first parts of Lon's description of the Gorn, she says something that really sets the tone. Starfleet believes that if we can empathize with someone who hates us, that we can eventually turn them into friends. They're wrong. not they might be wrong, not they could be wrong, or in this instance they're wrong. They are wrong. That is a very sobering statement of like everything that you've worked for the last few hundred years, post World War III, it doesn't apply to the Gorn. And to be honest, like it doesn't apply to the Gorn. It works for the Borg somehow. And in some instances, it works for Romulans and Klingons, but not the Gorn.
Except, and this is what I love about it, because we will be shown in time that Lon is wrong.
Yeah.
When Captain Kirk fights the Gorn on Cestus 3? No, not Cestus 3. I don't remember the planet.
Vasquez Rocks.
Around the Vasquez Rocks. I'm gonna try to look this up as we do this. But at the end, when Kirk shows mercy to the Gorn that's been trying to kill him, there is a mutual respect that kind of happens around the two of them, to the point where it was Cestus 3. Oh man, I got
nice. Good pull, sir.
Maybe it's because I've seen that episode a lot. But we know that certain shows are canon to Star Trek, and that if it appears on screen, it is canon. And in Star Trek Lower Decks, there are numerous times when Gorn characters appear working in and around Federation space stations.
Yep. But that's the distant future. That's the distant future, Drew.
But that is the hope that I have, is that they're going to show, like, this is the show that will prove that moment to be true, that the Federation can make friends with just about everybody. And that is what we don't see it in this episode, obviously, because this is first appearance. You're not going to get that this episode. For at least you're not going to get that for this particular alien species, because we know that they're a bigger deal later on down the line.
Mm-hmm.
You see that plenty of times with other species that appear in one single episode of Star Trek. But I look forward to that happening, especially when it comes to. I'm glad the writers and acting strikes are over. for the record,
Yeah.
because I am ready for more Strange New Worlds. Anyway.
Oh yeah, and to be honest, like I thank my lucky stars that it kind of went down the way it did, because as you know, the show covering everything chronologically, and I was on a weekly track, I was like, what am I gonna do? But because I've switched to releasing an episode every 2 weeks, and there are currently 2 seasons of Strange New Worlds, Strange New Worlds season 1 and 2 should carry us through 2024. And hopefully by the time we get to season 3, it'll be out and we can start that up early 2025. That's the general plan. Barring some unforeseen events occurring. That's the plan as it stands. But yeah, so well, last question here, Drew. Because you're a super fan of not only Star Trek, but of the Gorn specifically, do you feel Gorny, baby? Do they make you Gorny?
Yeah, baby.
That's so stupid. Sorry. Well, do you have anything else about the episode before we move into the stats?
No, I guess I have my own stat that I made note of because it was interesting. There is 10.5 minutes before the main theme starts in this episode.
That's been something that I'm really interested in, and the idea of the structure of a cold open. For those of you who don't know what a cold open is, cold open is basically any sort of scene, any sort of action, any sort of dialogue that happens prior to the opening theme and the opening credits. The very first skit of Saturday Night Live is considered the cold open skit.
Jerry Seinfeld doing stand-up at the opening of every Seinfeld episode.
Of Seinfeld, yeah. Whatever scene happens before James Bond turns in that pose and fires a gun.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the cold open. Speaking of which, I actually just watched the last Daniel Craig film, No Time to Die, which might have the longest cold open of anything I've ever seen. It's got to be close to half an hour. Like there's so much.
There is a Japanese language film that won an Oscar a couple years ago, Drive My Car, I think, that I believe is an hour before the title credits roll.
What? Really?
I could be wrong about that. I haven't seen the film. I've been meaning to, but it's just, it's finding time to watch a 3-hour foreign language film in this day.
Yeah, and Star Trek is known for having cold opens, but in the age of streaming, we don't have to worry about commercial breaks.
Exactly.
The structure has been tinkered around with, and sometimes the cold opens are a little bit shorter. Sometimes they're a little bit longer. This one, yeah, it's a little bit longer.
Some Lower Decks episodes don't even have cold opens.
Yeah,
I think that's true of a couple of the other series, but I'd have to see. There was actually
more often than not there's a cold open, but there are a few that skip it altogether. Yeah.
There is somebody on Reddit the other day that I was seeing that this person and their I think their dad they time all the cold opens of Star Trek just for fun, just to see, and they were encouraged in this thread I was looking at. Why don't you guys post this information? We would all love to know this information of what's the longest cold open, what's the shortest cold open, And I haven't heard anything about it since then. So hopefully that they post that before I have to go and do it myself, because I don't have that time.
I was going to say, I don't need another Star Trek project on my plate. I am all set. Yeah, but no, it is interesting looking at, the lengths and structures of cold opens, because we get a couple of different scenes in a couple different locations. Usually it's kind of stereotypically, it's been usually on the bridge or in another department, but usually on the bridge. And they're talking about, the adventure they just had. Where are we going? What are we doing? And then something appears on the view screen and then everyone looks confused. Roll Jerry Goldsmith's music. Like it's the mini cliffhanger we look forward to in every episode. Exactly.
it was so long that I was like, oh, we're finally in the opening credits. I looked down, it's 10 minutes and 35 seconds that the main credits start in this, which is wild. And I think the only other thing that I want to talk about is another concept that this episode introduces that I am surprised to have not seen it in Star Trek before.
Really?
Starfleet Remembrance Day.
Yes.
Where
Yes.
where every member of they're on this mission, this mission to deliver this piece of technology, air purifier, is also on Starfleet Remembrance Day, where Starfleet crew members wear pins associated with different ships that have lost people. And I thought this was such an interesting a concept, because it is, Starfleet's not the safest job in the world.
Yeah.
You do this, it's a post-money society. It's not like you're doing this for the big bucks. You're doing this because you want to go out and explore. It's one of the things I love about the ideals of Star Trek is that, and that there are that you are remembering people that gave all for this, and just to say that some of the people, and it's hard to find what pins people are wearing because they're very small on the uniforms, but some of the ships include the USS Angelou, the USS Antares, the USS Cuyahoga, the Discovery. Probably Spock is wearing the Discovery if I had to guess.
Maybe
the Excalibur, the Farragut, the Gallant, the Congo, the Palenque, the SS Puget Sound, which is not a Starfleet vessel but a colony ship. That's one that we see. That's the one pin we get to see real big close up, because that's the one from La'an's background. Someone is wearing a pin for the Shinjo, the ship from the Star Trek Discovery premiere, and the USS Yangtze is one that appears. I'm sure there are others, but these are the ones that the people online found that I
and we're going to talk a little bit more about Remembrance Day a little bit later in this episode. But yeah, it is kind of interesting that it hasn't popped up before, because I even, in putting the notes together for this episode, was just kind of like, oh, let's take a look at Remembrance Day. Yeah, this is the only time. It just the once. So
well, I mean, it was
today.
it was a new idea for this,
Yeah.
and it makes sense for the structure of the episode that La'an is purposefully not wearing her pin for the Puget Sound because she doesn't want to reflect on her past and leave the past behind. And I forget the specific wording she uses when talking about it, but I don't know. It's such an interesting concept, because it was also interesting because I didn't find a crew member when I was watching, and I'm sure there is one that wasn't wearing one of these pins.
Yeah, I think everyone had one on.
I think even Uhura might have had one on, which is
she did, but I would be interested to see what her pin was, because she went from the Academy to the Enterprise.
but I mean,
or at least that's the story where.
But her pin was for a colony ship. That it could be something.
Yeah, could be. It could be. Yeah. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But with this episode, as with all the episodes so far of Strange New Worlds, we've seen some wonderful, wonderful things from these performers. But as we do every episode, good or bad, we always ask the question: who do we blame? This episode was written by Davy Perez and Bo DeMeo. Davy Perez, aka David Wolf Perez, was born in East LA and attended Los Angeles Community College. First credit was as a production coordinator on 7 episodes of History Channel's docuseries Wild West Tech. That was from 2004 to 2005. Hey, everybody's got to start somewhere. His first acting credit was season 1, episode 4 of The Conquerors, where he played King Ronaldo. And he worked behind the camera on a few shorts, but then became part of the writer's room on ABC's American Crime. That was from 2015 to 2016. That was his first writing credit. And then here comes the big one. He's worked on 52 episodes of Supernatural. That's seasons 12, 13, 14, and 15, being a credited writer on 12 of those episodes. But this is his first writing in the franchise, but not his last. And then we've got Bo DeMayo. His first credit was as Best Boy Electric on the short Tough Crowd, which is a really interesting student short film about a Muslim, a female Muslim student who is sort of rejecting her family's wishes to go into medical school for a career in stand-up comedy. So I took special interest in that. And if anyone's curious, I will put a link to it in the show notes. So check that out. Bo was also a writer-producer for Netflix's The Witcher and Marvel's Moon Knight. Before this, his first writing in the franchise, but not his last. So we will see both of those writers again. And this episode was directed by Dan Liu, who is from San Francisco, California. Early on in his career, he worked in the editing bay as an additional editor or assistant editor on various series, TV, movies, and short subjects. Moving on to editor of projects like the Walking Dead franchise. But this is his first work directing in the franchise, but not his last. So, Drew, I think I know where you stand based on your conversation today, but also your love of the Gorn. The question we ask every week is this essential viewing? If somebody is sitting down and working their way through Star Trek for the very first time, is this a must-see episode, or is this one that they could skip?
This is absolutely a must-see episode. You have to see this episode.
Yeah.
If there was a percentage more than 100%, I would say that. Yes, you have to see this episode.
Yeah, I think, looking at, as I do when it comes to this particular question, with the return to the episodic format, I think it is easier to skip episodic episodes. However, in following any one of these characters' story arcs, I think you really see growth in all of the main players. Certainly everyone on the bridge, Uhura and Hemmer, Mbenga and Chapel, number one, which there was one little issue, because we know now that Una is Illyrian and was getting blood or plasma from Mbenga. Did that affect Mbenga's biological structure and DNA now that he's got some of...
I feel like it's going in one direction. I feel like it's not going back the other way.
I don't know how blood transfusions work, so I could be an idiot.
They were also using they're using 23rd century blood transfusion technology. I feel like they've got it figured out. It's probably not going back the other direction.
Yeah, you're probably right.
I do want to say Jorg Hildebrand, who is a well-known Star Trek commentator. He's a contributor to the Ex Astra Scientia website, which is a site that I frequent. He has on X, formerly Twitter, when this episode aired, posted who was wearing what pin.
Oh, okay.
Now, unfortunately, this is a tweet thread that I can only see the first part of, but of course, La'an was wearing the SS Puget Sound. Uhura was wearing a pin for the USS Gallant. Pike was wearing the USS Discovery pin.
Interesting.
And Spock was wearing a pin for the USS Congo. But beyond that, there are, of course, pins for the Shinjuo, the Gallant, the Palenque, the Angelou, the Antares, on and on, the ones we already said. Those are the pins that they seem to have made. But yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So anyway, back to the question, is this essential viewing? I think, yeah, because I think we know, having seen the rest of season 1 and into season 2, that a lot of the things that are getting touched on here, this is the jumping off point. We're still very early in season 1, and so many of these things are jumping off points for big things coming up later this season and even in season 2. So yeah, I think you gotta watch this. And to be honest, like, so I may end up adding an additional question to this, because I've tinkered around with it with a few other guests. Do you think this series is a good jumping on point for someone who's never watched Star Trek before?
So again, I am old. So
It's going around.
yeah, it's hard to it catches up to you at some point. Honestly, yes, I do. I think that Strange New Worlds is a fantastic jumping on point because it feels more. And again, I like Discovery, which I always have to clarify that I like Discovery before I say things that sound insulting to Discovery. But I like Discovery. But when it comes down to it, this show is much more beginner friendly when it comes to Star Trek. It tells a variety of different stories that reach different aspects of Star Trek than because Discovery's plots are typically one overarching plot for the entire season with a couple of, maybe one-off episodes that don't focus on that wholly. Strange New Worlds doesn't do that. It's much more episodic. And as a result, you get just much more of a feel of what Star Trek is all about. And I think this first season of Strange New Worlds especially really tries to go for that. And it tries to give you episodes that don't only just focus on one facet of what Star Trek is about, but also gives you character focused episodes, which is something that I feel like that we don't have in shows like Discovery or even shows like Picard. I like Picard a lot too. Don't start with Picard. You gotta watch The Next Generation before you watch Picard. But
you're absolutely right. I think with even with the recap that they did in the pilot episode of Strange New Worlds, if you didn't see everything that happened in Discovery, they kind of give you the rundown real quick of like, we went to a planet, touched the time crystal, you saw your future. Okay, now you're caught up. But yeah, I think, and I've been back and forth on this particular question. Is this a good jumping on point? I've been back and forth because I definitely see both sides of this coin. But at the same time, my wife, who had seen a lot of Star Trek prior to Strange New Worlds, and she really enjoyed Discovery and, some of the movies and all that stuff. But there, later down the line in Strange New Worlds, there's a particular episode coming up where at the end of that episode, she turned to me and said, okay, now I'm a Star Trek fan. I was like, okay, there is no wrong place to
I'm
jump
interested
in.
I'm interested to hear what that episode is, but you don't have to tell me on air right now. But
okay. I'll save it for the after show. So folks, if you're not a Patreon supporter, please consider buying us a beer once a month and throw a couple bucks our way to keep this thing going. Please, for the love of God. I need money. Anyways, yes. Drew, thank you so much for carving out the time. I know you're a busy guy. Do you have any parting thoughts before we start to wrap things up? Any parting thoughts about the episode, the series, the franchise? Another wonderful experience here on the Computer Resume podcast. Any parting thoughts before we go?
Star Trek is for everyone, but this episode is for me.
Nice. Yeah. Well said. Well, one more thing before we go, as we did earlier mention, Starfleet Remembrance Day does feature prominently in this episode, but some may remember that this episode premiered 4 days before Memorial Day in 2022. And, regardless of your thoughts and feelings about where this country is and its leadership, past, present, or future, I think one thing that we all can get behind are the men and women who serve boots on the ground to protect us. I think that's a very admirable and very honorable thing to do. I served in law enforcement, which is not abroad, but it is at home. And some of my closest friends have served in the military. My own father has served in the military. So to all of those people, thank you so much. And I just wanted to give a couple of extra shout outs to some of the servicemen who have appeared on this show. So to podcasters Lawrence Todd and J. Curtis Strickland, Antarctic Press editor-in-chief and comics creator Brian Denham, Star Trek DIYer Captain Dan O'Connor, comedian Patrick Cunningham, game master and author Michael LeBlanc. To all of them and anyone I may have forgotten, thank you so much for your service. We truly appreciate it and send our greatest love from the bottom of our hearts. I'd also like to send 2 more shout outs. One to my friend in the United States Air Force, Philip Emery, and Sergeant Walton Snyder Davis Jr., aka Dad. Thank you so much for your service, and we really, really appreciate it. Well, folks, in 2 weeks, on March 18th, we will be joined by Jeremy Larson, aka Mad Riker, to discuss Strange New Worlds Season 1, Episode 5, Spock Amok, which is available exclusively on Paramount Plus. Drew, what do you have going on in the world that people can find and support and be entertained by?
You can find me on a number of different podcasts. Some of those podcasts include the Cosmic Crit podcast, which is an actual play tabletop RPG podcast for the Starfinder game, which is a fantasy but also sci-fi TTRPG from the folks at Paizo who created Pathfinder. And you can also find me at the More You Nerd podcast, where me and my co-host Miles, who has also appeared on this show, basically talk about just different random themes. We like to change up what we're talking about every month. And this month we're talking about video games and video game remakes. So you can find that at themoreyounerd.com and anywhere you can find us.
And where can people reach you directly?
You can go to cosmiccrit.com and you can join the Cosmic Crit Discord, where you can talk to me literally all day while I'm at work.
And I am at Mr. Todd A. Davis on all of the socials. From all of us at the Computer Resume podcast, thank you so much for listening. And I'll see you at Trek Long Island 2 this summer, baby.
Us on Patreon and like, rate, review, and share on all your favorite platforms. Feel free to send us your subspace transmissions to computerresumepodcasts@gmail.com or at Computer Resume on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. The Computer Resume podcast was created and produced by Mr. Todd A. Davis. Our logo was designed by Will Martin and Justin Bishop. The opening theme was produced by Justin Bishop, and our outro music was provided with permission by Dronode. Additional music was provided by Mr. Todd A. Davis and Gary Horn, and the voice of Computer Resume podcast and executive producer, me, Kat Davis. # LLAP. We'll see you next time.
Going through a Star Trek. We're doing Star Trek stuff in space. We probably got some phasers and shuttle pods, and we're gonna find a brand new race.
How many more of these?
How's that for a slice of fried gold?